Hey everybody, this is my first interview on the Independent Pro channel. Let me ask you a question. What if you could make more than most doctors for just pushing a button? No, I'm not talking about what I do, just hitting buttons on my keyboard. I'm talking about taking pictures. Now, this is a massive oversimplification of what my guest today does. But Christian, welcome to the podcast. And can you kind of introduce yourself?
I can't believe you said that because my sister's a doctor, and when she found out what I make in a weekend, she was mad at me. And she was like, I should do that instead. And I was like, well, okay.
Your client list is extremely impressive. For freelancers in writing, it's you want to have worked for, the big magazines, the big press articles. You have worked for Vogue, you've taken pictures for Hennessy, you've taken pictures. Your client list just goes on and on of the who's who. So can you introduce yourself, describe your career so far?
Photographer, I was originally based in New York. Now I live in Lisbon. I actually don't do that much photography anymore, but I started by doing a lot of more celebrity fashion events, and then I leveraged that into money because those events are usually, or anything that's like you kind of get paid in press. So the trick when you're starting out, if you can get those kind of gigs, don't think that those gigs are going to be good money. Those gigs are what you use to show your credibility to rich normies, and then you get money from them.
So let's talk about that. How did you actually break into this industry? Because there's so many people out there that think, I have a camera, I can be a freelance photographer, but it takes a lot more skill than that. But how do you start as a freelancer in photography?
So when you're starting, it depends on what type of photography you're going to do. And I was like, I just kind of got out of photo school, and I was like, snap, I need to work. And so I would kind of do whatever I could, and I would leverage my network. It's all about networks, right? We think we love to sit behind screens and do stuff and talk about social media and X, Y, and Z, but really face to face with other people is hugely important. And through my networks, I ended up getting an interview with an agency that did fashion events. And that's where a ton of it was a grind. And that's where a ton of my big name clients came through because I was shooting for an agency and working with them and then, doing the jobs that way. And it literally was just it was a woman that I knew who worked in PR. I actually forgot this. A woman I knew who worked in PR. And I was like, I do event photography. And she's like, you should call my contact at X, Y, and Z. And there's a lesson on how to get clients that I'll talk about in a little bit that we can glean from that. But yeah, it's so many things happen through your network. So many things happen because people know you and because you ask. And one of the tricks that I like to do when I need something is I like to ask the other person what they need, right? So if I'm with somebody, I was at an event last night and I actually didn't need anything from anybody, but I said to people, if you could meet one person at this party who, if I had a magic wand and somebody who could change the trajectory of your life or your career, who would they be? What would they be and why? Right? And someone was like, I didn't think about that, but I could use X, Y, and Z. I'm like, cool. Let's try to find that for you, right? If you know what that is. So when you go into social situations, try to find out what other people are looking for. And then with reciprocity, they'll eventually ask you the same question. If they're good people. If they're not good people, they've already told you that they're not there to help. So I think my takeaway from this would be when you're starting out, ask other people what they need, but ask them the question. It's like in dating. Don't ask a question you don't want them to ask back, right? If you have a bad relationship with your father, don't say, hey, what's your relationship with your father like? Because they're going to be like, well, what's yours like after they answer? And then you're going to have to answer it. So ask the question that you want to be asked. And that's always a good start when you're in social situations. In terms of being a photographer and knowing when you're good enough, it's weird because photography is a lot of times somebody's passion and they really love it. And they conflate being good at enough to charge with really liking the thing. So if they get super excited, then they're like, that must mean I'm good, right? So you do need to put in the work. You do need to practice. So any skill that you're going to do that you're going to charge, I'm a big fan of practicing. And I'm actually a fan when people come to me and they're trying to learn how to start a photo business, practice with an end in mind, practice with a target, which means trying to recreate something. In copywriting, it would literally be, copying by hand and then trying to write a similar style of copy, but in your own, like taking somebody's old letter and rewriting it and then trying to rewrite it as your own. In photography, it literally is looking at a type of image and breaking it down. Right. And saying like, okay, so what's the pose like? What's the setup like? What's the lighting like? What's the lens like? What's the boop, 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 boop? What's the post processing like? It's going through and being able to hit a mark. Once you can hit a mark and you can do that reliably and that's valuable to somebody, then you can start charging.
I know very little about photography. This is just not my area of expertise. So are there basic skill set that you need to have as a photographer, like framing or setting up a shot and editing? Like, what are the basic skill sets you need to get started as a freelance photographer?
Yeah, I mean, you need to, know how to use the settings on the camera. And you have to get to a point through the use where you become subconsciously competent in that, right? Because there's all these it's like driving a car. Like you can't drive for Uber if you have to be thinking, where's the windshield wiper, right? And it's the same thing with actually using the equipment. So that means getting your hands on the equipment and practicing and practicing and practicing, which luckily is easy enough to do. And then in terms of photography, there are different styles that you could do, right? So fashion is one thing, still life is another, food is another, and then B2C portraiture, right? So if you were going to do family portraits, dog portraits, headshots, all of these are their own different kind of verticals. And the trick is to get really good at one of them as quickly as possible, one of them that you like the people that you'd be working with, and then go from there. Because you can make really good money as a photographer, especially if you're doing portraits, relatively quickly, and you don't actually have to be that great. In terms of the skills, you need to know how to use a camera, you need to know how to expose, you need to know how to frame things up properly, you need to know enough about the technical to know what the different lenses do, and then you need to know enough about post-processing. So you need to know enough about the actual act of culling and editing, and then photo manipulation with Photoshop. You need to know enough to know how to direct someone to do it. Because people get into the weeds where they're just like, oh, I'm editing. And it's at a certain point, you don't make money for editing. You make money when you're talking to customers or potential customers or lead sources and when you're shooting. Those are the only times you really make money. And the rest, everything else can get farmed out. But because people feel really safe, no one's going to reject them when they're editing. So they over-focus on that. But I've had people that I've taught them how to sell, and then they didn't actually know how to edit. And I was like, oh, snap, you can't deliver. So you need to know enough to be able to deliver the product to your client. But at a certain point, if you're going to do this to make as much money as possible and have as much fun, you have to be willing to let go of some aspects.
So let's talk about, how did you get your first client? Because you talked about this a little bit, where you worked with some agencies, but basically I want to know the trajectory of your first client to being one of the higher paid photographers in the freelance industry. So what was the trajectory there?
So I did kind of go to photo school, and my actually very first client was before I went to photo school. Again, through my network, I got an assisting job. So I was like, oh, somebody was they were a photographer and they're like, oh, I'm looking for an assistant. And I'm like, I'll do it. And I did a lot of stuff for free. I wasn't, I don't want to say go out there and be exploited, but when you don't know what you're doing, there is a value to just being around the equipment and the stuff and being able to work, and you learn a bunch. So yeah, and I just told everybody, I'm a photographer. But the thing about it is I see this a lot with people where they get very uptight about, I'm only going to do this for this amount of money. And the thing is, you can take certain jobs, one, taking them for practice and taking them just to get better at them is very helpful. And it's also low stakes if you're doing something. If you're just completely new, a friend of mine, I helped her start her business, and she was kind of completely new and really loved photography. And it was literally her shooting her friends. Right. And then asking people in her network, hey, I'm looking for families who want a family portrait. And then you end up doing that. The great thing about photography is that you can actually shoot for free and still make great money if you sell on the back end, if you sell print products on the back end. So if you were a photographer and you're like, okay, I want to make some money, but I'm not really ready to to feel the commitment or trying to get people to pay me without having a bunch of work, you do what's called a model call, where you're like, hey, I'm building my portfolio and I'm looking for people who want X, right? I'm looking for this type of person, like, oh, I'm looking for families with kids who are under 10 who are adventurous and are willing to go on a photo safari with me. And then people are like, oh, for free, I'll do it. That sounds great. I need family photos, right? You put the word out on social media. And then what you do is you say to them, cool, I'm going to shoot for you for free. I'm going to give you one print and one digital. I'll bundle them together. And anything else that you like, you're going to pay my rates. And, this is what they are. So you send them like a sheet of what the print rates are. There are tons of people who make great money doing that, because photography, in terms of portrait photography, there's a huge sale on the back end because it's about fear of loss. And once people have gone through the experience and they see what they're actually saying no to, and they have an emotional attachment to it, then it becomes an issue. Then they're actually willing to spend money. If you say, oh, do you want these great portraits of yourself? It doesn't mean anything, and they're not going to say yes beforehand, but they will say, don't throw those out. I'll pay you for them afterwards. So if you're a photographer and you're like, okay, I want to start making money as quickly as possible, but I don't have a portfolio and I don't really have that much experience, I would practice one vein of photography until I felt like I could deliver enough that it would be valuable for somebody. And then I would put out the word for a model call. And I would also figure out what my print pricing was. And then I would learn how to do what's called in-person sales, which is a sales presentation afterwards. You do a reveal, you do a slideshow, and then you say, these are the things that I think you should buy. And you sit there and you go through with the client. You can do it on Zoom, and you go through with the client and you're like, okay, let me buy this, let me buy that. So your question was, how did you start? And my answer was completely different.
I love it. So one of the things that I'm very curious about is how many different ways of making money do you have as a photographer? Because you're talking about there's selling the photo shoot itself, there's selling on the back end, there's productizing things, selling still photos of different things. How many different ways do freelance photographers have of actually making money, and how many of them have you utilized?
It depends on what style of photography you're going to go into. Right? Because if you're B2B versus B2C, it becomes a really kind of wild space when you get into certain things. That's why I think it's really good to specialize relatively quickly. You can always go off in another direction if you don't like that specialty, but it's very helpful because you don't have to learn all of it. So with almost all consumer-based photography, you have the option of doing money before and money after. So they can pay you to book a shoot, which they're willing to do, which is fine, but you can make great money on what's called in-person sales, which is selling after the fact. So that's selling physical product and digitals. And a lot of times people bundle them together because it's like, okay, if you buy the physical, you get the digital. There's what's called shoot to burn, which we don't really love as photographers because it's not the best thing for the client. It's not the best thing for the client to basically just get a download link and then look at the images and never do anything with them again. You want the client to actually have physical prints. So you need to convince yourself that even though it's going to feel a little weird because you're going to try to push them to buy physical products, that it's actually better for them. So that's more business to consumer. And most of the money, depending on who you are, is made on the back end. A wedding photographer can sometimes charge a bunch to start out with, and they'll charge a package and there'll be product in there. And then if you're doing more commercial work, you're getting paid a day rate, or you're getting paid a day rate, and that day rate is based on use, right? And this is kind of beyond the scope for freelancers. And this is a lot of times where you'll start to get an agent, but you're like, oh, we're doing, a Nike thing and it's going to be Asia only and the use is going to be digital. You get paid differently if you're shooting a billboard than if you're shooting, an Instagram campaign.
That makes sense. One of the primary skills of any freelance career is selling, and you've demonstrated that brilliantly. This is really all about, obviously the work is important. You have to do quality work, but the money is always in the selling. So where did you learn to sell? And what's one tip you could leave people with to improve their sales skills as a freelance photographer?
Oh, okay. Well, the thing is that you need to ask people like what it is they want, and there's a lot. One tip is like don't impose what's going on with you financially on your customer, right? Like if $500 is a lot of money for you, chances are it isn't for your customer. So don't freak out about that. Think of sales as a way to solve a problem for them. And that the thing about the way that photography sales happens with the sale after the fact is that you're working on spec and they're paying you just for what they want. And as long as you give them a heads up beforehand that that's how the process works, and you give them a heads up as to what the actual pricing is, you've empowered them to make the decision, and you're empowering them to offer them what it is that they're going to want to pick, right? In terms of selling and the mindset, most of the time people are lying to themselves and saying that they don't want to be a sleazy used car salesman, where it's like, that's a lot of work. You haven't done the work to get those sales chops. I hate to say it, like you're not going to be a sleazy used car salesman. You're just saying that because you don't want to get rejected, right? And so the thing is like, get to the point where what you're doing is asking someone what they need and then seeing whether or not you're the right fit for them.
Yeah, that's absolutely. It's 100% accurate. It's selling is really just helping people. You're helping them get what they want, and this is why sales works. It's why sales is not sleazy. Like I hate the used car salesman thing because like most people buy used cars and you buy it from a salesman and it's because you needed the car. Like he
Yeah.
is generally just helping you find the best car that works for your budget. And of course he wants to make the commission, but at the same time, he makes the best commissions by helping you get exactly what you want and you referring people to him. So this sales is the it's like the most healthy, wholesome process in the world when done right.
Yeah. How can I help you? What do you need? Sales, it's like you have two ears and a mouth for a reason. Like be asking questions and know who your customer is. Like that's part of it too, where you haven't, if you're not specialized and you don't know who your customer is, you're kind of feeling weird because you're like, I don't know if I can do this very confidently. Let me see if I can like dupe them into giving me money because I'm not 100% sure. When you know you can knock it out of the park for them and you know you've done it before, then you're like, yeah, great, I can do this. I can nail this. It's fantastic. I've done it before. I can do it again. Let's go. Right? And you know what you're looking for in your client. It's a little bit more difficult when you're starting out. But the thing is, like with photography, if you're doing it on spec, which is basically, it's not really what they call it. This is just called in-person sales. If you do it that way, it's totally up to them, right? Like they could also not buy it. And it happens to people. I have a lot of friends who do it like this, and they're just like, yeah, you know what? Like I didn't have anything else to do on a Wednesday afternoon. A friend of mine who's a very successful pet photographer, and sometimes she'll get, she'll shoot somebody's dog. She'll go for 45 minutes, shoot the dog, boom, boom, boom. Sometimes those sales are $2,000-$3,000, and sometimes the sales are $200. And she's just grateful for every dollar. And she's just like, yeah, okay. And she's like, well, what else was I going to do? Work begets work. That's the thing. Like when you're starting out, don't be afraid to work a bunch in a lot of different ways, because people see the camera in your hand or they see you doing this thing, and work begets work. Like don't get too like, I'm not doing that because I'm worth more. Like, yeah, sure, great. But like when you're starting out, just hustle, just do a lot of work and have a great attitude. And that goes a long way.
Yeah, I love it. You have to go out there and do the work. You have to put in hours. It is a career. Freelancing is work. I hate the people online that sell this as like a biz op, is like, oh, start a freelance business and get rich overnight. It's like, no, that's not how this works at all. You have to really put in the work and be good at what you do and learn to sell.
You have to be able to deliver for people. Like that's do the work means like not just like faff about. If I'm teaching somebody how to start a photo business, I'm very much like, you need to be goal oriented in why you're learning what you're learning and what that's going to give you that you can give your client. Because with photography, people are just like, oh, I shot this flower. It's always this thing of like, people are like, I wish I could make money shooting landscapes. And it's like, yo, that's kind of just like hiking plus. I mean, like, I don't mean to be mean, but like, and landscapes, there are some people who can do it, but the person who wants to do landscape photography is somebody who wants to do it for them, right? Like, unless they have like a client that they're doing it for. So make sure that like when you're doing the work of learning, you're learning this with the bent of how do I help people? Because that's another resistance point that people have where they're just like, well, my photography is art and I'm not going to cheapen it by doing X, Y, and Z. And that's fine. If you're a fine artist, it's a completely different thing. But I'm talking about like how to run a business.
No, I did the same thing. In college, I studied fiction writing in college, and I was going to be the next, great American novelist. And then I got out into the real world, and I was like, oh, nobody pays me for this shit. So I have a novel that's at the bottom of that filing cabinet behind me that will never see the light of day because it was terrible. And then I made millions of dollars doing freelance copywriting, which is actually helping a client make more sales. Like, you have to understand that you're helping somebody else achieve their goal, and that's how you achieve your financial goals.
And being very serious about what it is that you do in terms of how you help that client.
Yes.
So one thing that we haven't touched on is like, so I was doing all this work for all these people and I was like not really into it, and the money wasn't great because it was semi-prestigious. You're working for names and blah, 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 and going to parties and fancy fashion shenanigans, right? And what I did was I actually ended up, through my network, leveraging that into basically creating a productized service, which was just me. I mean, I didn't have other people do it, but I created my business only really shooting bar and bat mitzvahs. Okay. So I went from shooting a bunch of stuff that wasn't really that lucrative to shooting like 12 to 15 times a year. And it really and it was a very productized service. It's the same thing all the time. I had, it was just, I could literally just go through, you couldn't tune out, but like I had the same documents. I had the same, oh, who's going to be on what camera shooting with what lens at what phase of the event. Right. And I just had like documents of like, okay, this goes here, that goes there. Here we go. Print them out. Boom. So I basically ended up doing this productized service in New York, and my friends would joke that I was the Mitzvah King, which was kind of true. And I loved it because it was like a wedding with a proper budget. All the music for 13-year-old kids very much crosses over into gay club land. So I knew all of those songs. And, it's kids, so you're done by midnight, right? There's none of this let's pay to go for longer. Also, it's very pure because it's a family celebrating the fact that they've gotten this far as a family. Whereas people don't age in reverse. There's no Benjamin Buttons. Like, once you've turned 13, you keep going. But, people get divorced all the time. So you knew it was going to last, right? So I would do that instead of what I was doing before. And it really just freed me up because the question of everyone's like, okay, so how do I get my clients? The way that you start getting your clients is really just by working and letting people in your network know that this is what you're doing and showing people what you're doing, right? But it's and asking people, what do you need? This is what I need, right? And doing the work begets more work. And at a certain point in time, look for the opportunities where you're where are the leverage points into the most money for the least amount of work, right? Which was bar mitzvahs, because it would eat up 2 or 3 days of my life total, but I would end up with the post-processing sale, I would end up at over 10,000 per on average because I would sell more on the back end. And then I would just work kind of 15 weekends a year, and the summers were off because all the kids would go to camp. So look for leverage points, right? When you get really specific at solving somebody's problem, you get really strong too in how to talk to your customer and how to let them know you know how to solve their problem. For instance, with my clients, I knew that they all wanted the same thing. And when I said this one magic phrase to them, they would all just be like, oh, he's the one. And I would just turn to them and I would say, don't worry, I'll make your arms look skinny.
No, that's brilliant. It's exactly.
Lisa knew I knew what I was doing.
Yes, it shows you know what you're doing, and it shows that you're actually providing value to the customer. That is the thing they want the most, is to not look bad in photos. I can't tell you how many times, I've seen a picture of myself on social media or something posted, and I'm just like, oh no.
As you're going through with your business, keep an eye out for opportunities that are leverage points. There are ways that you can become more valuable to your clients by niching down and fixing important problems for them.
Yes. Let's talk about what you're doing now, because you said you're not very involved. You're not taking pictures anymore, basically. You're not doing the photography thing. So what is it that you are doing right now?
So right now I'm doing a lot of all things, running ads on the Meta platform and doing a lot of conversion rate optimization work.
Interesting. How did you get into that?
And one thing that I was doing before this, honestly, so what happened is that I had been working, trying to be like, oh, let me start a like how to learn photography business. And I kind of was like a little bit over that because unfortunately, photographers are a funny group where they want to learn more of the technical stuff, but they don't want to learn more on how to make money. But they want to complain that they're not making enough money. And I'm like, okay, girl, okay. But through the process of trying to like teach this, I learned a lot of marketing skills. And then all of a sudden, I did a funnel for a friend of mine who's a photographer. And I was like, oh, wow, this worked really well because I had all the like skills in terms of, landing pages and running ads and stuff. And so then I started doing that for photographers, which was very interesting because we all have this fantasy of, I stole this term, but it's stranger money. We all have this fantasy that somebody's going to call us up or email us out of the blue and be like, I saw that post you did and you look amazing and I've got $10,000 burning a hole in my pocket right for you. And it's like, that's not how it works. They have to know, like, and trust you. And you have to build that. I have a secret for referral marketing, and we'll get into that in a second for referral networking. But yeah, so I was doing funnels for photographers for a few years, and that went really well. And then I was like, oh, but I can actually kind of expand this to other things. So I've been doing that now lately, is expanding the kind of conversion rate optimization and ad skills to other people.
So I do want to talk about the network part because I have the same thing. It is network is everything. Your network is your net worth, right? The cheesy phrase. But how do you go about building a network?
I thought you would never ask. So the thing about networking is I really like a hubs spokes node model. Familiar?
It sounds, I was a flight attendant for a year, so actually that does sound familiar.
Okay, so the model that I really like for networking is the hub spokes node model. It's actually named incorrectly because it should be spokes, hubs, nodes. And it is 3 tiers of people that can help you in your network. The spokes themselves are the clients. And a lot of times people think like, oh, how can I get my clients to get me more clients? And that is incorrect, right? What you want are the hubs, which are people who influence your client's buying decision. And then the next level on top of that, which you want in order to connect you with the hubs, are nodes. All right, here's an example, because this is all very like, wait, what? I was working with a headshot photographer who did headshots for actors on how to grow his business. He kind of fell into it because he loved photography and he was an actor and his girlfriend was an actor. And so he started shooting headshots of, his friends, his girlfriend, and it took off, right? So he basically was getting word of mouth from other actors. And so I sat him down and I said, okay, I'm going to teach you this model because that's fine, that's great. But if you can connect and become valuable, create know, like, and trust with a hub, then they're going to be able to funnel a bunch of actors. And once I tell you what a hub is in this situation, you're going to be like, how is this anything that is so obviously that's so stupid? But people don't do the basics, right? A hub is an agent. The actor's agent. They've got a bunch of actors that they need headshots for every year. So I said, this is what you're going to do. You're going to go with all the actors that you found that you've shot before, and you're going to say, by the way, who's your agent? And you're going to email that agent and you're going to say, hi, this is name redacted, and I shot so-and-so's headshot. How is it performing? I want to make sure that what I gave you is working well. If not, I'll have them come back in for free. You just tell me what you need and I'll have them come back and I'll give that to you. Like every time you shoot an actor, ask them who their agent is and introduce yourself and ask them how you can be of service to them. how you can be part of the team where the goal is getting this person bookings, right? If you're all on the same team, if you're all rowing in the same direction and you introduce yourself and you let yourself be known that you're a team player and you're there to help them out, oh, wow, all of a sudden they start sending a bunch of people to you, right? And you've only really had to maintain one relationship, and that's a relationship with the hub. And you get a couple hubs, and before you know it, ding, 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 you're in business. Now, if you need hubs and you can't go through the spokes, you go through the nodes, right? And so the nodes on the other side of that would be a casting director. A casting director knows who a bunch of agents are, right? Because that's who they call when they're like, hey, I need you to send actors or models, let's say actors. And so you would, if you could find a casting director, how do you do that? When you're asking somebody, what do you need? If I could introduce you to somebody who could change your career, what would it be? And they tell you, and then they ask you the same question. You say, I shoot headshots for actors. I am looking for actor agents or casting directors, right? And then they start thinking about looking at it that way. So you want to get the actor's agent, and so you go in those two directions, right? For you as a copywriter, it's like, well, who am I looking for? Okay, well, what kind of copywriting do you do? Do you do long form sales letters? Like, do you do VSLs? Do you do, like, what do you do? And then you start to go, okay, who uses my services? Clients, right? But who would recommend me to clients? And that would be agencies, right? So I try to find agencies or other people who are also lateral moves who would have the same hubs as you do. What I mean by that is, okay, so let's say somebody who does SEO or web design. These are all people who are going to need good copywriters. So you start chatting with them. And then you start saying like, oh, who do you have? You share your network, as long as it's not competition for you, which honestly, you shouldn't think of it as competition if you're providing a service, because your service is different than other people who do the same service as you anyway. So being generous and knowing like there's enough for everybody and it's not competition, that's very helpful. I don't think I answered your question. I think I just went off.
No, you did. I asked you how you network, and you described your spoke and hub and node model perfectly. It was
there you go.
Freaking brilliant. I loved it. So do you consider yourself kind of an extrovert?
Kind of.
So this is the thing that I always tell people, because I'm a writer. I am much more introverted than extroverted. I can fake it for a while. Like I can do these interviews and seem personable, and then I need a nap. But when I go to live events is the best place to like network. It's just you'll meet people. Meeting people in person is just the best way to get clients, because it's the fastest way to build that know, like, and trust that you were talking about. But what I do when I go to events is I attach myself to a person like you. I find an extrovert that asks the exact same questions that you do, and then they introduce me to everybody. And I've had relationships that have been, 15 years now it's been mutually beneficial because we both refer each other clients, but I attach myself to an extrovert and they introduce me to everybody. It's the perfect way to go if you're introverted and not comfortable going out and making those relationships.
That's actually, I never thought about it like that, but you're 100% right, because I was at a party last night and I would like meet a new person. I would chat with them and I'd be like, oh, and I knew a good number of the people at the party. And I'd be like, oh, who do you need to meet? Who's going to be beneficial for you? And they'd say, oh, I need to meet blah, 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 and blah. And I'd be like, okay. And then I would literally scan and be like, would it be that person? Would it be that person? Like, because I do love making connections, because part of it is find an extrovert, also find an extrovert who likes to make connections, because it's incredibly valuable for us to be able to make connections, because then we become a valuable person in the community. For extroverts, it's like, well, if I know a bunch of people, then I'm way more valuable because I'm the person that got you, the person who sold you your house, or I hooked you up with blah, blah, blah. Or Also, knowing what you want and asking other people questions. If you're an introvert and you're afraid to go up to people, just remember, everybody wants to talk about themselves and be like, oh, what brought you out tonight? Like, what is it that you do? How do you help people? Like, sometimes I just ask straight up, how do you help people, rather than what is it that you do? Because what do you do gets so boring. What's your favorite part of that? Just asking like positive, fun questions, but literally write the questions down and just have like, make a mnemonic for yourself and have like 7 questions in your head. And by the time you get to the sixth question, you'll know whether or not you want to keep talking to that person.
Yeah, and if you're introverted, honestly, like you rehearse these in the mirror until they sound natural.
Yep.
Because it's fine. Nobody's going to hear you do it. You need to practice these questions. You need to sound natural and comfortable when you're saying them. It will become it does not work if you say, "What is the thing that you help people with?" Like you can't do it that stiffly. It will not work. You have to just practice.
Also know that being an introvert is okay depending on what your job is. Like my job was party photographer, right? Like I am professional at going to parties. Literally. Like if I go to a party and I don't have a camera, I'm a little bit bored, right? Like party is my job. So yeah, you would want me to be your party photographer, right? The person doing my taxes, I don't want them to be as chatty as me. So know that if you're kind of what is expected from the type, use it. It's okay. It's like nobody's going to get mad at you if you're like, oh, well, I'm a writer. Like, okay, obviously you're going to be an introvert. Cool. Like, we're not expecting razzmatazz.
Brilliant. All right, Christian, we have been going for 10 minutes longer than I promised. Where can people find you, follow you, learn more about you, connect with you?
Oh my God, you really can't. Honestly, if you have any questions, just holler at me. Christian at christiangrattan.com. That's my email. But like, I don't even really have a website anymore because hello, referrals. Like, I don't need you hollering at me. Like, if you're gonna come to me, like, you better like somebody. I want a referral. Like, you better tell me like, why is it that I should be working with you? Like, somebody better say like, oh, hey, I've got the person for you, and I'll be like, okay, I'll take the call. I mean, not to be bitchy, but like, I hate to say it, when you really do something that solves somebody's problem, you are valuable. And one of the things that you have to remember, and it's going to sound crazy because you're starting out in your career and you're just like, what the fuck are you talking about? I don't know if I'm allowed to swear. Too late. You're like, I mean, oopsie, but bleep that. But you think money is the biggest currency, and actually solving somebody's problem is way more important than money. Money is everywhere. Look around you. Everything that you see, except for maybe a tree, but probably because it probably came from a nursery, all of that was somehow attached to money. Money is everywhere. But someone who can solve your very specific problem is very rare. Finding somebody who can shoot your kid's bar mitzvah, who's done it a million times and who's going to be great and a value add at the party, that's not walking down the street. Okay, that's not like, oh, everywhere you go, it's a dime a dozen. Somebody who can write copy that can like, boom, get your customer right here and get them to go, I need this, I'm willing to pay. That, when you're really good at this thing, you're the value. Money isn't the value. So don't worry when you go into a sales presentation or a sales meeting where you're like, oh, hey, get good at what you do, know how you solve somebody's problem, and then know that like, look around you when you're on the bus or the plane and be like, how many of these people can solve this specific problem? Not that many. That makes you valuable. How many of those people could scrounge up $1,000 if they needed to? All of them, right? So money is a very easy resource to get. Having someone who will competently solve your problem is very rare. And that's what you do. You make yourself the person who can solve somebody else's problem. And then you're just like, yeah, you have money. Guess what? So do other people. Like I do marketing for people. I make people more money. It's valuable. And it might not be valuable to you because you might not be in the place where you want to make more money the way that I do it. Fine. But everybody wants more money. Everybody wants whatever their problem is solved.
Amen. You don't have to solve everybody's problems, just to solve the right people's problems.
Yeah. And like literally, if you can just solve the right person's one problem over and over and over again. You don't even have to solve all their problems, just one.
Brilliant. I think that's the perfect place to cut it off.
Okay, good.
Thank you for coming on.
Thanks.